The 11th night. It was nearly dark. Robert was racing through the center of town, though he didn't recognize the streets or buildings. He ran as fast as he could, because Mr. Brockle was after him. Once he was so close that Robert could hear him panting. "Stop!" Mr. Brockle shouted, and Robert spurted forward with all his might. Yet he hadn't the slightest idea why Mr. Brockle was after him and why he was running away from him. Besides, there was no way Mr. Brockle would catch him. The teacher was much too fat. But when he got to the next corner, what did he see but a second Mr. Brockle, tearing out from the left. He bolted across the street, not waiting for the red light to change. And at once he heard a whole chorus of voices behind him calling out, "Stop, Robert, stop! We only want to help!" In addition to the 4 or 5 Brockles at his heels, the ones now pouring out of the side streets, as alike as peas in a pod, were soon Brockles running straight at him. Robert shouted for help. A bony hand grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him into a doorway. Thank God it was the number devil. "Follow me," he whispered. "I know a private elevator that will take us to the top floor." The elevator was paneled with mirrors, so Robert could see an endless band of number devils as Robert looked lookalikes. This is too much, Robert thought. These crowds of the same people. Still, he was free of Brockle's voice in the streets, and when they reached the 50th floor and the elevator door opened noisily, he and the number devil stepped out to a delightful roof garden. "You don't know how I've wished for this," Robert said, as he rocked peacefully on the swinging bench. From where they sat, the people down in the street looked like ants. "I had no idea there were so many Brockles in the world," said Robert. "Well, they're nothing to you," said the number devil reassuringly. "You shouldn't be afraid of them." "I guess it's kind of a thing that happens only in dreams," Robert said. "If you hadn't shown up in time, I wouldn't have known what to think. That's why I'm here. And now there's no one to disturb us. Tell me what's wrong." "All week long I've been brooding over what you showed me last time, and how it hangs together. I'm glad you showed me all those tricks. They're fun, but I can't help wondering why. Why do they turn out the way they do? The blankety-blank number, for instance, and the 5. Why do rabbits behave as they knew what a Bronchi number is? Why don't unreasonable numbers ever end? And so, why does what you say hold true always and forever?" "So that's it," the number devil said. "You want to do more than play around with numbers. You want to know what's behind them, the rules of the game, so to speak, the meaning of it all. In other words, you want to know what a mathematician wants to know." "I don't know what a mathematician wants to know. I only know you've shown me things, but never proved them." "You're right," said the number devil. "I apologize. The problem is, showing things is easy, as you put it, fun. Guessing isn't bad. Testing guesses is even better. You've done a lot of that, but none of it is enough. Proof is all. And now you even want hard proof." "Right," Robert agreed. "Oh, part of what you said I get, just like that. But there are things I don't get at all. I don't see how and why they work." "To make a long story short, you're dissatisfied. Well, that's good. Do you think we number devils are always satisfied with what we come up with? Not on your life. No, we're consistently contemplating new ways to prove things, thinking and pondering and meditating. It's a way of life for us. But when the light finally goes on, and it takes ages because the centuries fly by, then we're pleased as punch. Only then are we satisfied." "You must be exaggerating. It can't be that hard." "You have no idea," the number devil replied. "Even when you think you've understood something, you may wake up one morning and realize there's a catch." "Can you give me an example?" Number devil rubbed his chin and paused for a moment. "You think you know everything there is about hopping. What could be simpler than going from 2 to 2 times 2 And from 2 times 2 to 2 times 2 times 2. Right. To the first, to the second, to the third, and so on. It's a cinch. Yes, but what happens when you hop with a 0? 1 to the 0 power, 8 to the 0 power, or 100 to the 0 power? What do you think you get? Shall I tell you? You'll laugh. But the answer is 1. Always 1. 1 to the 0 power is 1. 8 to the 0 power is 1. 100 to the 0 power is 1. How can that be? Robert was amazed. Don't ask. I could prove it to you, but you'd go mad in the process. Try me, said Robert. Now he was angry. But the number devil remained calm. You have never tried to cross a raging stream? The number devil asked. Have I? Robert cried. I'll say I have. You can't swim across. The current would sweep you into the rapids. But there are a few rocks in the middle, so what do? I see which ones are close enough together so that I can leap from one to the next. If I'm lucky, I make it. If I'm not, I don't. That's how it is with mathematical proofs. The number devil told Robert. But since mathematicians have spent a few thousand years finding ways to cross the stream, you don't need to start from scratch. You've got all kinds of rocks to rely on. They've been tested millions of times and are guaranteed slip resistant. When you have a new idea, a conjecture, you look to the nearest safe rock, and from there you keep leaping. With the greatest of caution, of course, until you reach the other side, the shore. That's all well and good, said Robert, but tell me, where is the shore for the numbers or pentagons or hopping? Good question, said the number devil. The shore is a couple of simple sentences. Couldn't be simpler. Once you get them, you're home free. They're your proof. What are they? Well, here's one. Every ordinal number, be it 14 or 14 billion, may be followed by a 1 and only one number, namely the number plus 1. Here's another. A point may not be divided because it has no area, and yet another 2 points on an even plane may be connected by only one single line, which then continues endlessly in both directions. I see, said Robert, and starting with a couple of sentences, you can leap your way to those blankety-blank numbers or even to the Boca numbers. Easily, the number devil's eyes shone. You can go even farther, said. You just have to look each time you leap. Picture yourself in the middle of the stream. You've got rocks to rely on, remember? Sometimes the rocks are far apart that you can't make it from one to the next. And if you try to jump, you fall in. Then you have to take those tricky detours, and even they may not help you in the end. You may come up with an idea, but then you find that it doesn't lead anywhere. Or you may find that your brilliant idea wasn't so brilliant after all. The number devil looked over at Robert with a gentle smile. Remember what I showed you the very first time, the numbers I conjured up out of ones. 1 times 1 is 1, 11 times 11 is 121, 111 times 111 is 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. 1,111 times 1,111 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 2, 1. So on and so forth. It looks as though it could go on indefinitely. Robert remembered that night well. Right. You got so angry when I tried to say that there was something fishy about it. But you know I only said that to get your goat. I had nothing at all to back it up with. You had a good nose, the number devil admitted. Later I went back at it, and you know what? When I came to 1,111,111,111 times 1,111,111,111, I fell in. All I got was a number hash. So even though the formula worked well enough for a while, it collapsed in the end without proof. In other words, even a number devil can fall on his face. I remember one, a man in the moon, his name was, who put an idea into a formula he thought would always come out without exception. Well, he tested it a billion or 500 million times, the madman, and each time it worked. He computed himself half to death with a giant computer. He was much, much more precise than we were with a blankety blank, the 1.618, until he was absolutely positive the formula would work forever. Then he sat back satisfied. It wasn't long, however, before another number devil, I've forgotten his name, came on the scene, and he computed himself 3/4 to death, and with every greater precision. And what he found? The number devil looked at Robert, that the man in the moon was wrong. His wonderful formula worked almost always, but not always. And almost isn't enough. The poor devil, he was working on prima donna numbers, a ticklish business, let me tell you, and a fiendish difficult to prove. I agree, said Robert. Even when only a few lousy pretzels are at stake. It drives me crazy the way Mr. Balka goes on about why it takes X hours for Y bakers to bake pretzels. I much prefer your tricks. You're too hard on him. I think the poor man knocking out lesson plans night after night. He can't go rock leaping as we do whenever we please. I feel sorry for him. I bet he's gone home to correct your homework. Robert looked down the street, and sure enough, there wasn't a single Bockwell in sight. Many of us, Bill went on, have an extra or even harder time of it than your Mr. Bockwell, however. One of my older colleagues, well-known Lord Russell, once took it in his head to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. Look at this proof. This is how he went about it. Ugh, said Robert with a shiver. That's horrendous. And all to show that 1 + 1 = 2? Something he knew anyway? That's right, the number devil nodded. Even though everyone knows that 1 + 1 = 2, Lord Russell wanted to prove it. Now you can see where that can lead. The number devil paced up and down, getting carried away. By the way, he continued, there are all sorts of problems that look almost as obvious as 1 + 1 = 2, and they're just as hard to prove mathematically. Let's say you're going to take a few weeks to drive around the country, and you have 25 friends to visit, each in a different city. You get out the map and you look for the shortest route to save the most time and money. What's the best way to go about it? Sounds easy, doesn't it? Let me tell you. A good many people have lost a good deal of sleep over it, even some of the most crafty number devils, and not one of them have cracked it, not to this day. What's so hard about it? Robert asked, surprised. You just go through all of the many possibilities. You chart each one precisely on the map, and then you work it out to see the possible shortest route. What you mean is you make a kind of grid with 25 dots, right? If you want to visit only 2 friends, then there'd be one route from A to B. Well, actually, there would be 2 routes. You could also go from B to A. But that's the same, Robert said. Now, if you want to go visit 3 friends, there would be 6 possibilities. Note that all of these routes are equal in length. By the time we have 4 friends to visit, things are considerably more complex. You know, said Robert, I'm not quite in the mood to count up all the routes. Well, that's precisely our 20-hour, said Neville Dole. It's very much like the seating problem in your class, I'm afraid. You remember the terrible time we had with Al, Betsy, and Charlie and the gang because there were so many possibilities? You bet I remember. 3 kids, 3 room, 4 kids, 4 room, and so on. Well, it's the same with the tour problem. Then why is it so hard to solve? Asked Robert. All you need is to find the various routes and pick the shortest. That's what you think, the number devil replied. With 25 friends, you have 25 room possibilities, and that's an awful large number, approximately. You can't possibly test all of them and determine which is the shortest. It's beyond even the most powerful computer in the world. In other words, no way. Not necessarily. We've racked our brains over this one for quite some time now, and as I say, the cleverest number devils have tried every trick in the book. Sometimes we can work it out, sometimes we can't. Too bad, said Robert. Sometimes it's only halfway. What's worse is we can't even prove with any certainty that no perfect solution exists. That would be something at least. It would allow us to stop looking for one. Besides, proving that no proof exists is a proof in itself of sorts. Robert, said Robert. It's comforting to know that number devils can fall on their faces. I thought you could conjure in your way in and out of everything. It just looks that way. Many is the time I've been stuck in the middle of a stream. There are times I feel fortunate to get out with my dry feet. Heaven knows I don't want to put myself up there with the greats, but even they, and you'll eventually come to know some of them, even they have their problems, which only means that mathematicians will never be over and done with. And a good thing too. There will always be plenty to keep us busy. So goodbye for now, my boy. First thing in the morning, I'll be looking for the simplex algorithm for polytopic surfaces. The what? The best way to unravel a foul up. And for what that I need a good night's sleep. I'm off to bed. Good night. And with that, the number devil disappeared, and leaving Robert on a rock peacefully on the swinging bench. I wonder what polytopic surfaces are, Robert thought. But then he decided it didn't matter. All that mattered was that he didn't have to worry about Mr. Brockle anymore. Whenever Mr. Brockle got on his back, the number devil would come to his rescue. The night was mild, and Robert gave himself up to the pleasure of rocking and dreaming and rocking and thinking about nothing at all till the break of day. Chapter 12. Robert had stopped dreaming. There was no giant fish to gobble him up, no ants to crawl up his legs. Even Mr. Brockle and all his lookalikes left him at peace. He slid no more. He froze no more. He was no longer locked away in the cellars. He slept better than he had ever slept before. That was all well and good, but it also got to be rather boring. What was the number devil up to? Maybe he'd had a good idea and couldn't prove it. Or maybe he got bogged down with his polyp surfaces or whatever it was he was talking about last time. Though maybe he'd forgotten about Robert. Robert didn't like the idea in the least. His mother couldn't understand why he spent hours on end drawing dots and lines and mumbling about visits to non-existent friends in cities he'd never seen. Do your homework, Robert, she would say. Once Mr. Brockle caught him scribbling away in class. What are you up to there, Robert? Give it here. But Robert had managed to crumple the paper with a huge number triangle into a ball and sneak it over to Charlie, who could count on good old Charlie. Charlie was used to covering for him. One night, however, he slept so soundly that it took him a long time to realize there was one pounding on his door. Robert! Robert! And who did he see when he finally jumped out of bed and opened it but the number devil. I'm glad to see you, he said. I've missed you. Come quickly, the number devil said. I've got an invitation for you. He's here. And he handed him a printed card with gold border. It said, by special mission in the presence of Robert, pupil of the number devil, Telepoxlix, is hereby requested for the dinner this evening in Number Hell and Number Heaven. General Sanctions. The signature was illegible squiggle, but that appeared to be an Arabic script. So your name is Telepoxlix? Robert said, pulling on his clothes as fast as he could. Why didn't you tell me before? Only the inner circle can know a number devil's name, he replied. Does that mean I now belong to the inner circle? Apparently, otherwise you wouldn't be receiving an invitation. Funny, Robert said. The invitation says number hell, number heaven. What's that supposed to mean? Either one or the other. Number paradise, number hell, number heaven. It's all the same in the end. He went to the window, and opened it as far as it could go. You'll see. Ready? Yes, said Robert, though he was starting to feel a little bit uneasy about the whole thing. "Then climb on my shoulders." Robert was afraid he was too heavy for the number devil, who was no giant, but he didn't want to insult him. And lo and behold, no sooner had he put his arms around the number devil's neck than the number devil leaped out the window and soared into the air. This could only happen in a dream, Robert thought, but why not? A flight without noise, without safety belts, without silly stewardess giving you coloring books and plastic toys, as if you were 3 years old. It's good for a change. It ended in a perfect landing on a terrace of a magnificent palace. "Here we are," said the number devil, letting Robert down. "Where's my invitation?" Robert asked. "I'm afraid I left it at home." "Don't worry," the number said. "Anyone who really wants to can enter. The trick is to get here in the first place. And that, as you can imagine, very few manage." Robert had in fact noticed that nobody seemed to be checking the people going through the giant double door. So in they went and set off a long, long corridor of endless doors, many of which were open to varying degrees. Robert peeked in the very first room. Tubblux put his finger to his lips and said, "Shh." What they saw was a very old man with snow-white hair and a long nose. He was tottering around and around in circles and carrying out a great debate with himself. "All Englishmen are liars," the man mumbled. "But if I say it, then what? Or what then? I'm an Englishman myself, so I'm lying too? But then what I just said, namely, that all Englishmen are liars, is not true. But if Englishmen tell the truth, then what I said before must be true as well. In other words, we are liars." The number devil sailed to Robert, and on they went. "That's poor Lord Russell," Topasa said to his guest. "You remember the one who proved that 1 + 1 = 2? "Isn't he a bit confused?" Robert asked. "Not that I'm surprised. He must be terribly old." "He's not the least bit confused. He's got all of his wits about him. As for his age means nothing here. Besides, Lord Russell is one of our youngest. He hasn't reached 150 yet. So you have some pretty elderly residents here in the palace." "You'll see," said Telepox. "In number heaven, no one ever dies." They came to another open door and peered in to see a man squatting in the corner. He was so tiny that Robert didn't notice him at first, though that may have been because the room was filled with the most curious objects. A few were large pretzels made of glass. Mr. Bogle would have been pleased, thought Robert, though you couldn't eat them, and they had the weirdest shapes. The number devil called Robert's attention to the unusual-looking green bottle. "Examine it carefully," Tuckbox whispered into it. Robert's ear. "Can you tell the inside from the outside?" Unbelievable, thought Robert. It could only exist in a dream. Imagine you wanted to paint the inside blue and the outside red. What would you do? There are no edges. You wouldn't know where to stop the blue or start the red. "And that little man is the one who invented it?" Robert asked. "He looks as if he would be happier inside the bottle." "Not so loud. Do you know what his name is?" "Dr. Little, Dr. Happy Little. But let's go now. We have lots more to see." The next few doors they passed had "Do Not Disturb" signs on them, but one was wide open, and they stopped. The walls and furniture were coated in a fine dust. "That's no ordinary dust," said Talkbox. "That was more granules than a body could count in a lifetime. If you wanted to cover the head of a pin with it, you'd have to gather all the dust in this room. The man you see there is Professor Singer. He is the man who discovered the dust." Professor Singer, a pale man with a goatee and piercing eyes, was singing to himself and doing a nervous little dance in the room. "Infinity times infinity is infinity," he sang. "Super infinity times infinity is super infinity." "Let's get out of here," Robert thought. His friend knocked politely on one of the next doors, and a friendly voice called out to them, "Come in." Telepoxus was right. The palace inhabitants were so old that he seemed to be trifling by comparison. Nevertheless, the two very old men who greeted them turned out to be quite lively. "Welcome, gentlemen, welcome," said the one, a man with large eyes in a wig. "My name is Al, and this is Professor Horace." The latter looked very stern, and he scarcely glanced up from his papers. Robert had a feeling he was less than happy with their visit. "We were just chatting about the prima donna numbers," said the friendly one. "A fascinating topic, I'm sure that you are aware." "Oh, yes," said Robert. "You never know where you stand with them." "Right you are. But with the help of my colleagues, I hope to get to the bottom of them." "But what does Professor Horrors do, if I may ask?" But Professor Horrors refused to divulge the subject of his labors. "Professor Horrors is responsible for a brilliant discovery, a whole new category of number, in fact. Tell our friends here what you call them, will you?" Said the man with the stern look about him, and that was all he said. "He means imaginative numbers," Telfax explained hurriedly. And then he apologized for the eccentric gentleman from having interrupted their labors. And so it went. They looked in on Baraka, but his room was teeming with rabbits. They passed rooms where the Mayans and the Arabs and the Persians and the Indians were working and talking and sleeping. Farther they went, the older the people seemed to be. "The one over there, the one who looks like a Moriah," Thomas says, "he's at least 2,000 years old." The rooms grew in size and splendor until finally Telebox and Robert stood before a kind of temple. "We're not allowed in there," said Telebox. "The man in white you'll see is so important that a little devil like me can't even say boo to him. He's from Greece, and you wouldn't believe the things he's discovered. See those tiles on the floor, the ones with the pentagons and stars? Well, one day he decided to cover the floor with them, and when he couldn't do it without leaving gaps between the tiles, he came up with unreasonable numbers to explain why. Rudebargs, remember? Two Rudebargs, the Rudebarg of 2, the Rudebarg of 5, and the blankety-blank numbers. You remember those, of course." "Oh, yes," Robert assured him. "Well, Pythagoras is the man's name," the number devil whispered. "You know what else he came up with? The word mathematics. Anyways, here we go." The hall they now entered was the largest Robert had ever seen. It was bigger than a gym, bigger than a cathedral, much, much more beautiful. The walls were decorated with mosaics of the most variety patterns, and a majestic throne of gold stood in the first landing of the gigantic flight of steps that led so high that there was no telling where it ended. Robert couldn't get over it. He had never dreamed the number devil lived in such luxury. "Never held my foot. This is paradise." "Don't be so sure." "Oh, I can't complain, but there are times late at night when I'm getting nowhere with my problem, and I think I'll go out of my mind. I'm only one step from the solution, but a wall has grown up to keep me from it. That's hell." Robert tactfully held his tongue and looked around. Only then did he notice the endless long table in the middle of the hall and the waiters along the walls. Suddenly a beanpole of a man at the entrance swung a stick as far back as it would go and struck a gong, which resounded all through the palace. "Follow me," said Thomas. "Our places are at the end of the table." Once they had taken their seats, they watched the more famous number devils file it past. Robert recognized the owl and Professor Horace, and then Boca from the rabbits on his shoulder, but most of them had never seen before. There were some solemn Egyptians, there were Indians with pink dots on their foreheads, there were Arabs wearing burnouses and monks in habits. There were Africans and American Indians, Turks with curved swords, Americans in jeans. There were thousands of them. Robert was amazed how many number devils there were, but also at how few women he saw among them. He spotted no more than 6 or 7, and no one seemed to be taking them seriously. "Why aren't there more women?" he asked. "Is there any rule against them?" "They used to have a hard time of it. Palace policy was clear. Mathematics is man's work, but things seem to change of late." When the guests finally taken their seats and mumbled their greetings, a beanpole struck the gong again, and the hall fell silent. A Chinese gentleman in fine silk raiment ascended first the stairs, then the throne. "Who is that?" Robert asked. Could be the man who invented zero," Telepox whispered. "Is he the greatest of all of them?" "The second greatest," said Telepox. "The greatest lives up where the stairs lead into the clouds." "Is he Chinese too?" "No one knows. None of us has ever seen him face to face, but we revere him greatly. He is the commander-in-chief of all number devils, the man who discovered one. Though for all we know he may not be a man at all. He may be a woman." Robert was so impressed that he couldn't say nothing. Meanwhile, the waiters had begun to serve the meal. "Hey, they're starting with dessert," Robert said. Then the waiter placed a slice of pie on his plate. "Shh! Not so loud, my boy. We eat nothing but pies, because pies are round and the circle is the most perfect of all figures. Here, try one." Robert had never tasted anything so delicious in all of his life. "Suppose you want to find out how big the pie is," the number devil said. "How would you go about it?" "Don't know. You've never shown me how, and in school we're still on pretzels. You need to what you need is an unreasonable number, the most important of them all. A man all the way up in the head of the table discovered it more than 2,000 years ago. Another Greek. Without it, we wouldn't know to this day how big a pie like this is, or how big our wheel or rigs or oil tanks are. In other words, anything that's round. Even the moon and our own very earth. Without the number pi, we'd be lost." By this time the room was abuzz with number devils having a good time, though here and there Robert saw one staring into space and another making balls out of pie dough. Otherwise they all ate hearty and drank heartily from pentagonal crystal glasses, fortunately, and not Dr. Little's weird bottles. When the repast was over, the beanpole sounded the gong again, and the man who may have discovered zero rose from his throne and disappeared up the stairs. Gradually the other number devils stood as well, the most intimate first, of course, and started back to their rooms. Soon only Robert and his protector were left. Just as they were about to go, a gentleman in a magnificent uniform came up to them. He must be General Secretary, Robert thought, the man who signed his invitation. "So this is your apprentice," the dignitary in a somber voice. "Rather young, don't you think? He hasn't done any conjuring of his own yet, has he?" "Not yet," Robert's friend replied, "but it won't be long now, not at the rate he's going." "How is he doing with prima donna numbers? Does he know how many there are?" "Precisely as many as there are ordinary and odd and hopping numbers," Robert said quickly. "Very good. He can skip the examination. What is his name?" "Robert." "Stand, Robert. By the power vested in me as General Secretary, I hereby accept you into the lowest rank of number apprentices and bestow upon you, in recognition thereof, the Order of Pythagoras, 5th class." With these words he ceremoniously hung a heavy gold chain with 5-pointed star around Robert's neck. "Thank you," said Robert. "It goes without saying that this distinction shall remain a secret," the General Secretary added, and without so much as a nod he turned on his heel and disappeared. "Well, that's that," said Robert's friend and master. "I must be going. You're on your own now." "What?" cried Robert. "You can't leave me like that." "Sorry," said Tupelo, "but I now have work to attend to." Robert saw that Topswell was moved. Robert was too, on the brink of tears in fact. He hadn't realized how much a part of his life the number devil had become, but neither the one nor the other felt it seemingly to show his emotions, so all Topswell said was, "Goodbye, Robert," and all Robert said was "bye," and in the twinkling his friend was gone. Robert was now all alone in the gigantic table. How in heaven's name was he going to get home, he wondered. He felt the chain weight be heavier around his neck and the delicious pie growing heavier in his stomach, and before long he had nodded off and was soon so fast asleep that for all he knew he had never left his room on his master's shoulders. He woke in his bed, of course, with his mother shaking him, saying, "Time to get up, Robert. If you don't get up this instant, you'll be late for school." The same as always, Robert said to himself. In your dreams, you get delicious pies to eat. You may even get a chain with a star hung around your neck. And the minute you open your eyes, everything is back to normal. But as he stood in front of the mirror in his pajamas and brushing his teeth, he felt something tickle his chest, and he looked down to see the tiny five-parted star on a thin gold chain. He couldn't believe his eyes. This time his dream had come true. After he dressed, he took the chain off and snuck it in his pocket. He didn't want his mother asking silly questions. Where did that star come from? She'd want to know the minute she saw it. Boys don't wear jewelry. How could he tell her that it was an emblem of a secret order? Things were normal in school, except for Mr. Brockle, who looked more tired than usual and almost immediately took cover behind the newspaper to eat his pretzels in peace. But first he set forth a problem he was sure would take the whole hour to solve. How many of you are there in this class? Robert, he asked, and the eager beaver Doris shot up her hand and said, 38. Good, Doris. Now I want you to pay close attention. It's the first boy down here in the front row. What's your name again? Oh, yes, Albert. Well, if Albert gets 1 pretzel, and Betsy gets 2 pretzels, and Charlie gets 3, Doris gets 4, Enrique gets 5, Felice gets 6, and so on all the way down to number 38 back there. How many pretzels do I need to buy to supply the entire class? Robert was incensed. Mr. Brockle and his mind-boggling problems, he thought. Now we'll have to work like the devil while he takes it easy. Robert didn't let on how annoyed he was with the situation, but while his classmates hunched over their notebooks, he simply stared out in the thin air. What's the matter, Robert? Mr. Brockle asked, dreaming again? So he does keep one eye on the class, said Robert to himself. No, he said, I'm working out your problem. And he started writing. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6. God, how boring. By the time he got to 11, he was totally confused. He, the bearer of Order of Pythagoras, even if it was only the 5th class. But then he realized he wasn't wearing the star. He left it in his pocket. Cautiously, he didn't want Mr. Brockle to see. He hung it around his neck, under his shirt, and in a flash, he had the most elegant solution to the problem. Triangle numbers. What else? It was as if he had learned them just for the occasion. How did they go? He wrote the following. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. 13. So 6 times 13 is 78. If it worked for numbers from 1 to 12, it would work for numbers 38, or 1 to 38. So he wrote 1 to 19 and then 38 to 20. 19 times 39 equals. Cautiously again, he pulled out the calculator out of his briefcase and entered the following answer under the desk. Got it. Nothing to it. What? Said Mr. Brockle, letting his newspaper drop. Well, what's the answer? 741, said Robert. You could hear a pin drop. How did you do that? Mr. Brockle asked. Oh, Robert said, clucking the star under his shirt. It practically solved itself, he said silently, thanks the number devil for what he had done for him. The end.